morning, everyone. And I'd like to say thank you to the TIC 2020 team for allowing us the opportunity to deliver this webinar to you today. Thank you for your interest in this topic, for all of you joining us and listening in. And thank you, of course, to the panel of presenters who've agreed to share with us this morning. So I'll start by saying that human trafficking is a form of modern day slavery, right? And it violates basic human rights. And it treats humans as commodities that can be traded in a marketplace. And we really wanted to target this webinar this morning to the private sector to increase awareness of how trafficking specifically affects companies. And so today we'll be providing information both on the global dynamics in terms of what trafficking is, what it looks like, the different forms. And also we'll focus in a little bit more on the local dynamics, local legal frameworks, and of course, how this affects companies in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, and what are some of the obligations, right? So a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speakers. And that is that the agenda is such that we have 3 presentations, right? And then we have our Q&A section. For the Q&A section, we will not be having a live questions. What we will do is accept your questions in the box, and then I will pitch them to the presenter, and the presenter will respond, right? Now, because we have 3 very knowledgeable speakers who have a lot to share, and we really hope that there will be sufficient time to answer all questions. But if perchance there isn't sufficient time to answer all questions, what we will do is email all attendees post the webinar and share any unanswered questions via email, right? So, and of course, I think this has been the phrase of the year. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the entire session, right? And Christian, you can confirm if TTMA will be recording. So.
Hi, Rochelle, good morning all, and I'm happy that all of the participants, well, most of the participants have already signed in. Rochelle, I can confirm that the recording, the webinar, sorry, would be recorded. So it's up to the Living Water community, the host of this webinar. If you all would like to share the webinar, let me also quickly say that TTMA is also very much interested in tackling illicit trade, and we do recognize that there is a link between illicit trade and human trafficking, and it's a pleasure that Living Water community can host this webinar at the 2020 edition of the Trade and Investment Convention.
Great, thank you so much, Christian. And so just, well, thank you guys again for allowing us to do this, and of course confirming that the webinar is being recorded, and we will make a decision as to whether or not we send this to you all afterward. So our first presenter that we're really, really blessed to have is Ms. Lourdes Gutierrez Ortiz Monasterio. And Lourdes is the project coordinator for Track for Tip Caribbean project. And she works with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. That's also called the UNODC at their regional office for Central America and the Caribbean, based in Panama. And Lourdes specializes in law and criminal justice, and she's worked for many years on human rights issues with the government of Mexico. She's worked for at least the past 11 years on human trafficking issues, including for UNODC, covering border security, migrant smuggling, and human trafficking in Central America, and of course now the Caribbean, as part of this Track for Tip project that's funded by the US Department of State. So Lourdes, welcome, and happy to have you. And I'm going to hand over now to you for your presentation on understanding the multiple dimensions of human trafficking, sexual cyber crimes, and the ethical obligations of business. So Lourdes, over to you, and you can share your screen for participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, and for Living Water to invitation, also for the TTMA. For being here. It's an honor for UNODC working together, and also will share my presentation. And I will try to be more faster because it's a very short time. I hope so you can see it. Okay. Well, as Rochelle said, I'm Lourdes Gutierrez. I'm project coordinator of the Track for Tip Caribbean project. It's founded by JTIP. I work for United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And I'm based in Panama, but we cover 24 countries in Central America and the Caribbean. In these 15 minutes, I will talk about the UN mandate of UNODC, the overview, the supply chains, and the effects in the private sector, trafficking in person, cybercrime, and the responsibility of the combating human trafficking in the private sectors, and the good practice too. Actually, our mandate is promoting the norms and the conventions and the implementation, also these conventions and the protocols, and actually also development the knowledge of the governments to implement these protocols and the technical assistance in the multilateral level, regional, national, and local. Actually, UNODC have the mandate to protect this United Nations Convention against organized crime. Also, the protocols of this convention is the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in person, especially women and children. Also, the protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, by sea, by air, and also the protocol by arms. We have another protocols to have the custody about the money laundering and terrorism and other international instruments. Today, we are talking about the human trafficking and the smuggling of migrants. Also included this slide is because about the SDGs, because we need to work together, not only the government, also the private sector, the NGOs. This is our agenda for the next 10 years is missing. So as I said, I work with this project, Track for TIP. In these 8 countries, we have Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, Aruba, and Curacao. And I am the project coordinator of the last 4 countries that I put it in yellow with my colleague, Lisette Reyes in Dominican Republic. It's helped me also to cover this one. We want to work to the creation of the national capacities for the mechanisms for identification of victims of human trafficking, also the trainings and also the international cooperation. We have, as UNODC, another project who covers the Caribbean, like the AirCup project, the Container Control Program, CCP, Global Maritime Crime Program, also Worldwide Crime Program. So maybe you are going to listen more about this project in the next few months. Human trafficking, we are going to talk about human trafficking. It's a very clandestine nature and very complexity of the investigation of this crime. This is a very relation with the trafficker and the victim, and it's very difficult to investigate. And also the victim doesn't believe in the police, doesn't believe in immigration. So it's more difficult. It's not a regular victim. And also is the 3rd most lucrative business crime in the organized crime. The first one is the arms. The first one is drugs. After is the arms. And after it's human trafficking. And also is related with another kind of crimes like extortion, money laundering, corruption. So it's very important to understand the supply chains because if we think like a company, we think like the material prima, the production, the distribution, the sale, and the consumer. But in this time, we are talking about human beings, the person. So the exactly think of the company, it's used by the trafficker. So they went to some states, so just put in the Facebook that they want to find people to work in some places, and also they bring to the states and also sell them. So it's the same supply chain, just working with human beings. It's the reason that it's more offensive for the world, this kind of crimes, because the drugs is just consumed when they arrive to the client. Also the gun, they sold that gun and they finish that business there, and they need to bring another another arm. So in this case, we are talking about the people. So the clients are different, but also they have the victims to be selling every day with a lot of people every day. So the effects in the interest of the companies is because we are talking about the illicit trade. It's a very complex problem. It's a worse economic world. Population is growing, so the demands and the clients, it's growing too. And also the black market, and also the suppliers, manufacturer and consumers is changing too. The effects that we have is affect the global economy, because they evade taxes, they makes more money. Also, they are involved in organized crime. Also, sometimes it's involved in money laundering. Also, it's involved with terrorism in some cases. And in this kind of crimes, we affect the people, the society, and also the community. And what's human trafficking? Maybe you don't understand what is human trafficking or trafficking in person. Is the acts, the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, to use of force of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, loving, maybe you can get by loving, also to the purpose. The final issues is the exploitation of the person. Different means of exploitation. Maybe you only think about the sexual exploitation, but no. We have another modalities of human trafficking, and we have forced marriage, also forced begging, child soldiers, forced labor, illegal removal of organs, when we are talking about the selling children. So we have a very different modalities when we are selling a human being or rent a human being. The human rights violated in the human trafficking, as you can see, it's a lot about the life, about the security, about the dignity, about the health, the safe condition, the education. We have a lot of human rights violated in the human trafficking. And we have another separate illicit. It is a smuggling of migrants. Maybe some person confused and they think that there is the same crime, but not. It's completely different type of crime, human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. When we are talking about the smuggling of migrants, we are talking about the facilitation of the illegal entrance of one country, but also this person, this migrant, don't belong to this country, and the benefits, the economical benefits to this transportation of this migrant. The difference, big difference between these two crimes is about the concept. Sometimes the victims of human trafficking give the concept, but it doesn't matter for the criminal issues. The trafficker going to jail even if the victim give the consent. In the smuggling of migrants, the migrants give the consent to be migrant. Also, the exploitation is different because the victims of human trafficking, they are exploited every day for a long, long time. And in the migrants, they are not exploited unless during the trial or the way they can be exploited. So in this case, they are person object of smuggling of migrants, but also can be a victims of human trafficking. The transnational, it's a smuggling of migrants is transnational crime, and in human trafficking, it can be national or transnational. And the benefits. So we have a very different types of issues of this kind of crimes. Also, the trafficker can be any person. For our legislation, any person who works with this organized crime, the person who transport, the person who transfer, to the person who harbor, and the person who receive, and the person who who exploited all the chain are traffickers for this kind of crimes. And also the risk and the maintain the control for the trafficker, for the victims, we have a very different manners to do it. Sometimes they use the violence, sometimes use like a death, bondage, and also sometimes isolation. The forms of control of the victims, it depends of each victims and the trafficker. So it's not the same victims of each one. You know, DC makes a global report every 2 years, and you can see in this slide how the sexual exploitation is the most victims that we have, and also using the children's. So they also asked me to talk about the use of internet and how they can traffic using the internet to get victims, and just some slides about that. And you can see in the most used apps in the world is the Facebook, the YouTube, the WhatsApp, the Messenger. So it's the same platforms that they use the trafficker in person to get victims and this time of the cyber crime. Use it like as tool for get more victims easy. And also more children are inside. And at this time, I think when we go to sleep and close the door, we think that everything is okay because the criminal is outside of the house. But at this time, we have the internet 24 hours per day. So we leave the open door when we have the internet open all day for the children all day, and don't put attention of this kind of crimes. So we need to be digital citizenship, and we need to understand that we have human rights in the internet too. So we need to protect us, and also protect our family and protect our company. I will try to do as soon more faster, but the risk that we have in internet, we have a more risk, more difficulty for investigation. We think with this kind of internet, we reduce the distances. As you know, we can buy in internet a lot of things and get to us to our home very fast. And also the cybersecurity and the concept of grooming, sexting, sextortion. I'm sorry, I need to be more faster. The grooming is when adults go to a children to get sexual material, and a lot of make a different profiles to simulate that they are children and get the confidence of this kind, the trust of these children. Sextortion and is when we send the pictures of our personal pictures with pornography or maybe nudes, and they ask us to do another thing. If not, they are share our pictures. So it's very awful to have this one. And also we are talking a digital media and the trafficker in person. So this role of digital media against the human trafficking is for recruitment, for exploitation, for distribution, and for marketing. Also involves the commercialization of the human trafficking in this kind of internet. It's a complex, as I say, the stigmatization of the person of the victims in that. And also some persons, they say, if she give the consent, it's okay. It's not. The exploitation of the human being, it's not just give the consent, it's a crime because they are vulnerability of the human rights. But also the business ethics in the private sector try to avoid the corruption, they try to work with corporate code of conduct, the equal access of each of the employees. Also, they promote the human rights inside the company. They attend every cases, verify the supply chains. It's not only I'm the company, I don't have cases of human trafficking. The supply chains can help. So you also need to work on that. Also try to do prevention inside your company and report everything that you have for investigation. So we have a lot of examples that we already work with the Blue Heart campaigns against human trafficking of United Nations. working with the airports, working with the transport companies, the airlines, also with the hotels, working together with trainings and to deliver investigations. But also want to give you the puck with your heart, because it's important to us, the social responsibility of every company in the Caribbean to work together is not only the responsibility of the government, not only the responsibility of the NGOs, of the UN agency, it's responsibility of everyone to work together against human trafficking. And thank you so much, Rachel, and I finish here.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lourdes, for that presentation, and I'm sure the audience has so many questions. And so a reminder to everyone listening in, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A section, and we will answer those questions in the Q&A part of the session this morning. So thank you again. I see some new persons have joined us, and for those that joined us, you were just listening to Ms. Lourdes Gutierrez from the UN ODC, that's the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. So for our next presenter, I'm honored to present Dr. Jason Haynes, and he is the Deputy Dean for Graduate Studies and Research at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus in Barbados. He's previously served as a senior legal officer with the British High Commission in Barbados. And I mean, Dr. Haynes has published in so many journals. He's also recently published the monograph, Caribbean Anti-Trafficking Law and Practice, which has been really well received by lawyers and judges globally. And in one quote I saw, it was cited as an invaluable guide to those involved in this area of practice as advisors, advocates, and judges. So welcome, Dr. Haynes, and over to you for your presentation on human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago, where we'll be hearing about those legal and ethical issues, and particularly as they pertain to companies. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Haynes.
Well, thank you very much, Rochelle, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's all right and keeping safe, which is sort of the staple introductory phrase that we now use when we have presentations, just ensuring, of course, that all is well on folk and everyone's doing all right and keeping safe. All right, so today I am going to be presenting on issues that touch and concern the legal liability of the private sector for TIP offenses. And in a short while, I am going to bring up my screen so that you can see the presentation which I will be giving today. So as Lourdes has indicated, international law has evolved over time to treat with the different dynamics of human trafficking, and countries like Trinidad and Tobago have, of course, responded to the call from the international community to appropriately respond to the evolving dynamics of trafficking in persons. And so I'm going to share with you now my screen as we commence the discussion today. Now, international law is very varied in so far as the prohibition of human trafficking is concerned. The more punitive elements of international law are manifested in the context of the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, as well as a protocol for the suppression and punishment of trafficking in persons, especially women and children, rightly referred to. But also there are several other international instruments in the realm of human rights law, which touch on concern the prohibition against trafficking in persons. So Trinidad and Tobago is party to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which, while not specifically mentioning human trafficking, does in fact impose certain human rights obligations on states. And we talk about how those obligations are indirectly binding on corporations. And of course, many of you in the presentation today are representatives of corporations. So I think it would be quite useful to see how international law is translated into domestic law and becomes binding on transnational corporations and of course domestic corporations as well. So in addition, of course, to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there's the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as, of course, More recently, we've had the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination of Women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which coincidentally is perhaps the most widely ratified convention to date. Now, I will not necessarily spend some time on the question of international law, specifically in the context of the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, because I think Lourdes has presented the framework. But just to sort of repeat in brief, that we're talking here about the four-pronged test or the four-pronged approach to states combating trafficking in persons. Protection, invariably assisting and supporting victims of trafficking, prevention in the context of taking appropriate measures, social and otherwise, to ensure that persons don't fall prey to trafficking in Trinidad in context and more widely speaking, the Caribbean context. Also, we speak of prosecution in the context of appropriate measures being taken, including sanctioning of persons found to be involved in trafficking in persons, and of course partnerships, which I know are essential to any proper functioning regulatory regime on trafficking in persons. And of course, when we speak of partnerships, this is where NGOs and certainly corporations, domestic and otherwise, become particularly important, because the reality is, given the constraints of governments and which governments in the region face, it is inapposite to believe that they can do it on their own. They are very much reliant upon the assistance of private corporations. All right, so one of the important points to note about the discussion on international law on human trafficking is that it is not directly binding on public or private corporations, all right? Now, international law, in other words, doesn't have a direct vertical effect or relationship with private corporations. Rather, there's an indirect effect, all right? What does that mean? So that means that international law imposes certain obligations on states, and then states therefore incorporate those obligations into the domestic law. And as a result, those incorporated obligations, which reflect international law, then become binding on companies which operate in the particular jurisdiction in question. So international law, for example, requires that Trinidad and Tobago establish trafficking as a criminal offense, which it has. And in particular, insofar as we'll learn in a short while from now, companies are concerned, there could in fact be liability in certain circumstances for the commission of offenses of trafficking in persons. But also international law requires that states take certain action which are requisite for ensuring the physical safety of victims of trafficking. Now, indirectly, that has some binding effect on companies, because it means that states are permitted then to take enforcement action against corporations so as to ensure the physical safety of these individuals. All right, and of course, it goes on to speak about numerous other things relating to, for example, interagency cooperation, in which private companies would very much be involved. But I thought it prudent to mention also that commercial carriers, so airplanes and vessels, other vessels, they are under an obligation to make sure that persons that are utilizing their services have the requisite identity documents before actually traveling from one jurisdiction to another. And that is becoming a lot more relevant in light, of course, of the crisis which exists in Venezuela and the spill-off effect which it is having in Trinidad and Tobago. So international law requires that Trinidad and Tobago takes appropriate action to actually treat with that eventuality of passengers potentially not having their requisite identity documents being transported to other jurisdictions, all right? And of course, there are certain sanctions which could be imposed on commercial carriers in the event that they do not take the requisite action to comply with international law. And just want to mention a couple of other things in the context of international law before I go on to what Trinidad and Tobago is and has done to date. So not only is the Paloma Protocol binding on Trinidad and Tobago, but also its associated sort of chapeau convention, which is the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which speaks in large measure to the state taking appropriate measures to prevent against the commission or participation of legal entities, meaning companies, in the commission of crimes, including, of course, trafficking in persons. And of course, that states should take appropriate enforcement measures, namely the imposition of sanctions, where these companies have engaged in such conduct. But also it speaks quite frontally to the question of the confiscation of assets which belong to companies which engage in trafficking in persons, but also the instrumentalities. So the property that you use, the vehicles and other equipment, if it is that those are caught up in the mix of a trafficking enterprise, they can in fact be sequestered from you by the state. And so this is where we are now insofar as the relationship between international law and private corporations is concerned. Now, Trinidad and Tobago in 2016 adopted its Trafficking in Persons Act, which principally is meant to comply with the provisions of the Paloma Protocol. At, of course, much insistence of the United States State Department in the context of the annual TIP reports, which of course, as you know, rank countries based on the United States national legislation on trafficking in persons. Now that's the whole other story. Of course, questions might come up in the context of our conversation later on, but in the interest of time, I proceed to treat with some of the main concepts, some of the main ideas, some of the main principles which emanate from Trinidad and Tobago's approach to date. Now, the first thing to note is that Trinidad and Tobago's law on trafficking in persons seems to be consistent with international law to the extent that it provides in no uncertain terms that body corporates which commit trafficking in persons offenses can in fact be held liable for the commission of such offenses. All right. Now, those offenses may be committed simply, for example, if a senior member of staff of your particular company engages in the practice of trafficking in persons, or in circumstances where it may very well be that your instrumentalities, your equipment, your machinery, they're used for the purposes of facilitating trafficking in persons. Even your premises are used for the purposes of facilitating trafficking in persons. Or you perhaps have particular enterprises overseas, subsidiaries possibly, and in that context, those subsidiaries in the realm of their supply chains, they're utilizing the services of persons who might have been trafficked. In those circumstances, not only can the company in question be subject, in this case, to a $5 million Trinidad and Tobago, I believe, fine, but also those persons who are managing directors, the persons who are authorized to make decisions on behalf of the company, they will be implicitly held also to have participated in the commission of the offense and subject to the imposition of stringent penalties, including imprisonment up to a period of, I believe, 25 years. All right, so clearly we see here that Trinidad and Tobago is moving in the direction of ensuring that adequate protection is afforded to victims of trafficking by, of course, penalizing companies that engage in trafficking enterprises. But in addition, of course, to the fines which we've mentioned earlier, and the imprisonment of directors and so forth, we see also reference being made to the revocation of business licenses. We see winding up as a potential possibility. We see forfeiture of assets and properties, and of course, such other measures in an injunctive sense, which may prevent the particular enterprise in question from continuing to engage in the activity in question. All right. Now, the Modern Slavery Act of the United Kingdom goes much further than most other jurisdictions. And I stand to be corrected in terms of the date of Trinidad and Tobago's enactment of its Trafficking in Persons Act. I believe it was drafted in 2011 and it was proclaimed in 2015. So that would have been a typographical error on my part. My apologies. But insofar as other jurisdictions and what they're doing to sort of treat with this question of the involvement of companies in trafficking in persons, we turn to for example, to the United Kingdom, which would have adopted in 2015 the Modern Slavery Act. Now, that act requires companies with a threshold in terms of income of above £1 million annually to make certain statements relating to slavery and trafficking in persons every financial year, which are to be submitted to the Secretary of State. Now, these statements must, in fact, specifically indicate that the company in question has not, through its enterprises, through its subsidiaries, through its individual members, engaged in activities which are very much akin to trafficking in persons, or indeed modern slavery more generally speaking. Also, the entity in question would need to publish information and present it to the government with regard to what measures they are actively taking to combat trafficking in persons. And not only is this information presented to the government of the United Kingdom, but more so in the context of websites and other paraphernalia and material that companies use to market their particular goods and services, they are required, all right, to make an explicit statement to the effect that they have taken active steps to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, for example, in their supply chain, and that therefore they are fully consistent with the law in question. All right. Now, some companies initially complained about how onerous that is, about the fact that they would have had to hire additional personnel to assist in that context. But the reality is the government of the United States recognized it as such, as an important obligation, that they felt that it was worth it that it be included in the context of the Modern Slavery Act. And of course, injunctions can be imposed against companies that have refused to comply with the requirements set out insofar as publishing the human trafficking and modern slavery statement. Now, other jurisdictions, such as Canada, would have adopted similar approaches. I'm going to get to that just in a bit from now. But California seemingly is consistent insofar as its legislation in United States rather, on that question of the requirement to publish statements as it relates to measures taken to combat trafficking in persons in supply chains. And of course, it depends on how much, in fact, the company is earning. So in the United States context, retailers and manufacturers, which are earning a significant amount of money on an annual basis, in this particular instance, 100 million US dollars, they're required to make such filings. Now, the final point I want to note is in relation to a very important development which has taken place in the midst of COVID-19 in Canada, a jurisdiction which is, of course, a common law jurisdiction similar to Trinidad and Tobago. And it arises out of this case called Nevson Resources and Araya. All right, so the case speaks to the obligation now being imposed on states and companies, more generally speaking, which operate their particular companies, the parent companies in the home state, and they're investing abroad in the host state. And insofar as the investment in that host state is concerned, they would have taken no measures to prevent and protect against trafficking in persons, but also have taken measures which have contributed to trafficking or other modern slavery offenses that touch on concerned persons in the host state. So here you have a British Columbian company setting up its enterprise in Eritrea. Then it colluded with the authorities in Eritrea to get some of the conscripts because there's a mandatory service period that young people in Eritrea would have to go through. And these individuals were not paid for their services, which they would have provided extensively for an indefinite period of time. But in addition to that, they were subject to very harsh treatment. So for example, they were asked to roll in the sun while being barely conscious. They were subject to what is considered to be the helicopter imposition of penalty, which is to tie their arms together at the elbows, at the back, and have their feet tied together at the ankles and then left in the hot sun for about an hour. When they became ill, they were not taken to hospitals. They were confined to camps which were cramped. They were not provided with permission to leave, and if they threatened to leave, they were subject to the potential of retribution on the part of their families. And so they sought to bring an action against the company in question, not in Eritrea, but rather in Canada, for the alleged incidents which would have taken place in Eritrea, which is a first for international law. It's a first for this type of arrangement to actually take place in a Canadian court, or rather courts more generally speaking internationally. Now, ultimately, the court in Canada ruled that a sui generis, or a new cause of action, would have likely been created, which is a domestic cause of law action based on customary international law, because customary international law prohibits, in unequivocal terms, modern slavery offenses. So therefore, the court reasoned that the extant or the existing causes of action which existed in Canada, namely assault and battery and so forth, they were not sufficient to capture the egregious nature of what actually transpired. And so they were prepared to create a special cause of action to treat with cases such as this, where Canadian companies commit criminal offenses overseas in other jurisdictions, and those offenses amount to breaches of customary international law in the context of modern slavery. So I think that is a fascinating development, and it is something that we probably will see being received in other jurisdictions, and hopefully the Caribbean receives it pretty soon, which will go a long way in sort of raising the profile of companies involved in trafficking in persons, and of course, penalizing them in appropriate circumstances where they've been found to commit trafficking in persons offenses. All right, so you can check out my book when you have some time. And then thank you. I appreciate the fact that you stayed all this while to listen to the presentation.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Haynes. And I think you provided a lot of food for thought there. And certainly we're really appreciative of you sharing this very, very recent judgment, and which can have significant implications on companies in the future. So thank you for that. A reminder to everyone listening, and of course, those of you who joined late, welcome. And also, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer them shortly. So our first two presenters helped us understand in as quick as time was possible, and we apologize for that. They helped us understand a little bit more of the complexity of the issue, right? So both what are the global dynamics, what are these international legal frameworks, what are some of the forms of trafficking, right? And so our third and final presenter is Dr. Pear. And Dr. Pear is going to tell us a little bit more about the local dynamics of trafficking here. Who's trafficked? Where are they trafficked from? And Dr. Pear specializes in labor market and migration research, and he's conducted consultancies in over 30 countries. He currently works with the Canadian company Dunn, Pear, Barnett and Company Limited as the Director of Research and Business Development. Dr. Pear is also the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Cancaro, which works on the eradication of trafficking in persons, migrant smuggling, and also in education. Most recently, Dr. Pear was consulted to conduct the CARICOM Human Trafficking Survey in the CARIFORUM region, and his firm currently has one of the largest databases on migrants, of smugglers, of trafficking victims, and smuggling routes in the Caribbean. So Dr. Pear's presentation highlights some of his research, and I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Pear, and I'm hoping that if you that you are able to share your screen, and if not, I'm happy to share mine for you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and good morning to all the participants. I want to comment on Ludris and Dr. Haynes for for the presentation. Okay, so I now want to share my screen with you. So. Okay. Okay, good. Yes. So as I said, my name is Dr. Cleicus Justin Pierre, and as I said, I'm specialized in migration, forced migration, and the reason why I'm here is to present a synopsis of my study, which we conducted last year in the Caribbean region. We were hired by one of the regional organizations, CARICOM, to conduct a study, to conduct a comprehensive assessment on human trafficking in the CARIFORUM region. And so we did an analysis on 21 countries, but in order to really look at the human trafficking, we were able to do a more comprehensive analysis based on the database on the 32 countries. So we conducted maybe two of the largest study in the region. So in 2018, we did a consultancy on behalf of the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, the WHO, on the effect of health workers, how migration affect health workers. And that was in 2018. And in 2016, we conducted a very large study on migrants for the Turks and Caicos, and migration, and a study for the Turks and Caicos. So we went sort of looking at how the Haitians and how migration affect their Turks and Caicos. Okay, so the main purpose, the main countries of the study was Antigua, Bahamas, Trinidad, Domrep, and obviously Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, in summary, we wanted to discuss some of the findings that we realized. Well, what we realized is that the human trafficking occurs in almost every territory within the Caribbean region. Okay, human trafficking is on the increase. It's very important because one of the largest brothels in the world is concentrated in the Caribbean. In fact, in our research, in terms of our database, there are about 85 brothels within the Caribbean region, with 5 or more persons in a stable. So it's a form of business. Okay, we also found out that the most of the human trafficking occurred in the larger territories. We also found out that over 100,000 people every year are being trafficked and smuggled, more or less, through the Caribbean region. So in our research, we were able to interview persons from places like Africa, Asia, Nigeria, Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, all coming through the Caribbean in the way through the United States, Canada, and Chile, and also the French Guiana. We also found out that there's a place in between Colombia and Panama called the Darien Gap, and there's also a route, a preferred migrant route. We also realized that migrants, that criminal cartels operate migrant smuggling and human trafficking industry. There's a gateway from the Caribbean through Mexico to the United States and Canada. So, unlike the human trafficking is a bit different to the human trafficking which occur in the United States. So, for example, in the United States, the majority of trafficking, 90%, occur. It is domestic trafficking. However, in the region, you have a lot of you have mainly regional sex trafficking, meaning the persons who are trafficked who are not from the country. So, for example, a majority of the persons who are trafficked in Trinidad and Tobago are not necessarily citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and that's one of the difference we see in terms of our analysis. We also said that most of they're not from the Caribbean region, and also within the region there is a very low opinion of migrants. Okay, many persons, they blame the victims. Okay, though we want to know who are the victims in the Caribbean. So from our data, we found out that most of the victims are between the ages of 12 and 24 years. 80% of the victims experience physical or sexual violence during trafficking. 70% of the victims are used for forced commercial sex. As we mentioned, one of the largest brothels are in the Caribbean. We also said that 35% of victims are used for forced economic exploitation. Okay, and 45% of them are women, meaning that a company, a private sector, an employee or a company may use trafficked workers or smuggled workers to use in their industry, thus undercutting other local competitors. This is very important. 63% of the human traffickers or the trafficking victims have never traveled before. Some of them, when we interviewed them, some of them they don't have a passport. They were encouraged to come into the country. Most of them are economic smugglers who end up being trafficked. Many of them have education, and as I said, many of them are are regional traffickers. Okay, 75% of the victims are basically from 7 countries. 50% of the victims, they know the trafficker. We also see that there's a nexus between human trafficking and law enforcement. So 27% of most of the victims have identified a government official or law enforcement officer who facilitated their victimization. When we also spoke to some of the human traffickers now, around 17% of them said yes, someone assist us, someone within law enforcement assist us in getting our business. Okay, 36% of smugglers, okay, in the region are trafficked. We also realize that within Trinidad and Tobago, from our data, less than 1% of the victims are Trinidad and Tobago nationals. Okay, so as I said, there's this perception about migrants because very few of the human trafficking victims are actually nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. Okay, we also looked at routes. Okay, from our data there, we looked at 342 routes throughout the Carrefour region. Okay, and I said Venezuela obviously is one of the main areas for human trafficking. Okay, what we looked at when we divided the countries in terms of countries that have less than 5 routes, less than 10 routes, and more than 10 routes, and Trinidad and Tobago was in the set of countries that had more than 10 human trafficking routes. Okay, so what we did, I just want to go briefly into some of the studies, some of the findings that we conducted on the ground in Trinidad and Tobago. So what we did, we had a team that did a survey on issues relating to human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, what we did a survey with 319 persons from a cross section of the population of the population. We met people in Tobago, in Tunapuna, Diego Martin, Westmoreland. Okay, within Trinidad and Tobago, 56% of the persons interviewed were female. Okay, and about 51% of the persons identify themselves as living in the urban areas. So we had a breakdown in terms of community. We looked at human trafficking in the rural, interior, and urban areas. Okay, we asked people what's the reason? Why do people come to Trinidad? And 38% of those who responded said that they came here for better jobs and better education. So this is one of the main reasons why people come. Okay, we also ask persons in terms of human trafficking, how satisfied or dissatisfied are they with the level of public awareness towards human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago? And they said the majority of persons said either they were strongly dissatisfied or dissatisfied with the level of public awareness in terms of human trafficking. Okay, we also wanted to find out the level of where you get most of your information about human trafficking. And we saw that within Trinidad and Tobago, 55% of the respondents stated that they got their most of the information on human trafficking through social media. However, we saw in Trinidad and Tobago, only 3% of those surveyed stated that they got their information through the government. Okay, when we looked at the type of human trafficking exploitation that are experienced in Trinidad, the majority of persons stated that sexual exploitation was the main area where the level of awareness of human trafficking was located. Okay, we looked at terms of data. We wanted to see in Trinidad and Tobago, where are the people, who are the people, where the people came from, how many persons were trafficked, through Trinidad and Tobago, and we also realize that Trinidad and Tobago is also it's a destination country, is a transit country. Persons come into Trinidad and Tobago and then obviously they will stay there for a while, and then they will be trafficked to other parts of the region. As I mentioned before, in the Caribbean region has one of the largest brothels, and there's this demand for sex there in the region. So that does contributing to the number of persons coming in. Okay, we looked at what is called the victims by country. So we realized that Venezuelans, citizens of Venezuelans, are most of the victims are from that country. Okay, so we also said that we believe that the future, there is a risk, there is the potential of human trafficking getting worse or more prevalent in Trinidad, which is also on the increase, because in certain countries prostitution is legal, and because of their proximity to Trinidad, and because of the ease of getting into Trinidad, we believe that it will affect their country. We also see human trafficking comes as a suite of services. It comes with things like smuggling of contraband goods, of drugs, of guns, tobacco, pornographic material, pharmaceutical, alcohol, food, fish. So it comes with a lot of other extra items which can affect the economy if nothing is done about it. Okay, so we want to look at some of the impact on the Venezuela, impact on human trafficking. Okay, and we realize that the biggest impact on human trafficking, we have to look on the source country, because we realize that there are so many persons that are coming and being trafficked. We had to look at the source. And we realized that based on the Venezuelan economic and political issue, most of the victims came from Venezuela. So what we did, we had a team that went to Venezuela and investigated the situation with regard to human trafficking. And we found out that there is a specific part, almost 40% of the trafficking victims on Trinidad and Tobago came from a specific area in Venezuela. Okay, and these are the three areas: to Cupita, Irapa. Okay, which is in these places, it's just like an hour or 2 hours from Venezuela to Trinidad. And because of Trinidad and its borders, it has a very, very porous borders, and also so it's a very good destination. Also, because of there is a belief that as if you come to Trinidad, it will be easy because there's a very a low deportation rate. So if as soon as you get to Trinidad, obviously it will be safer for you. Okay? And we look at within the area of Trinidad, Venezuela. We saw that we got some information from the military, the Venezuelan military. We found that in 2011, approximately 1,000 persons were either missing or trafficked. When we look at in 2019, that 1,000 moved to 8,568. So we see that human trafficking is really affecting Venezuela, and especially this specific part of Venezuela. Okay, so what we did in terms of data, where did we get the information from? Okay, how we managed to get those data, how we managed to interview people. Most of the information came from, initially we started in terms of our methodology. We conducted interview we started off interviewing sex workers. So we got in contact with the local sex workers. We interviewed them, and they in turn referred us to other sex workers, foreign sex workers. Then the sex workers introduced us to their Johns. we met the Johns. Then the Johns introduced us to their trafficker, because the Johns want to make sure that the traffickers gave them a constant supply of women. Okay, we also conducted interviews with the boat captains, with the Venezuelan boat captains. We found out that approximately about 38 boats over the 4 years made about 279 trips from Venezuela to Trinidad. Okay, it was difficult to gather data from the boat operators from Trinidad. However, we were only able to speak with 11 of them, and most of them have said that there is a link between the form of organized crime, where, for example, some of the Venezuelan boats would meet the Trinidadian boat, and then they will transfer persons, because it is very easy for the authorities in Trinidad and Tobago to identify a Venezuelan boat, because obviously people can identify the Venezuelan boat because they have a higher bow. So if you see a Venezuelan boat anywhere, you know it's a Venezuelan boat. So there is this relationship in terms of organized crime between the Trinidad and Tobago sea captains and the Venezuelan sea captains in terms of smuggling persons to Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so this is basically what some of my findings are. Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pear. That was really very insightful. And I already got a couple questions from persons asking how they can access research. Dr. Pear's research will be published very soon, we hope. And we will be happy to inform participants that research is available to the public. We also had a couple of questions in the Q&A section, and I see some more are coming in. So let me turn back firstly to Ms. Lourdes Gutierrez, and it's unfortunate we had to rush through that presentation because there was so much rich information in there. But Lourdes, there's a question about the influence of social media on human trafficking. Can you tell us a little bit about what role social media plays there?
Yes, I'm sorry because I was very rushed, but yes, the social media, it's important at this time because a lot of people are using more the internet and the apps and the connection. So to research this trafficker to the victims, they are using this kind of platforms to get more victims, to be in contact with more people. And it's more easy for the traffickers to get the trust and this kind of victims, but also the control of the traffickers with the victims. It's more easy because you have the cell phone, you can research and search where is the cell phone and the movements. So it's very complexity at this time, more difficult to investigate, but it's not impossible. Is the reason that, DC have another program, is cybercrime, to help the countries to deal with this kind of crimes. Or also, we need to think about the cyber police. So it's a different change of the world. And with this pandemic, it's more easy to get victims and to see offers, but in internet to get a job. So you need to be double checked, to be alert, and to check if it is true, these kind of offers.
Thanks, Lourdes. And Dr. Pear, you would have also in your research come across instances where, for example, Facebook was used in trafficking.
Yes. We saw that. We found that. We asked some of the victims, like, how you manage, how did you, what sort of media, and they said, Facebook. The offers of jobs, because of the economic situation, people said, well, we can give you a job in a restaurant or in somewhere in like a massage parlor or something like that, and when they accepted their job, as soon as they left their community, the conditions changed. They were then brought into human trafficking, and also there is a process. So because when we interviewed some of their victims, we asked them, what process? So there is a sensitization process. So there are certain things that the traffickers will do. Okay. In fact, for example, within the region, you can be a trafficker you can be trafficked from in three ways. One, you will be smuggled. You want maybe from, let's say, from Venezuela to Trinidad. Smuggled, you want to come to Trinidad, and then you will be then become a traffic. Second, you will be offered employment opportunities. So you will accept a fake employment. When you accept it, you will then when you leave your place, they will hold you and traffic. Then second, then also you will just be kidnapped. Okay, because I think that a couple of months I wrote a story about a situation in Venezuela where these two women, they were kidnapped from their place. For students, they met each other from school. They were kidnapped and brought to what was on the way to be carried to Trinidad. Okay, so we have to, social media is very, very, very important, and especially in this economic situation where persons want jobs. There should be we have to be more vigilant, and also communication. When one person responded to an ad on a bus stop, she saw that there is a need for employment. If you want like a nanny, and she applied for the job, and when she went there, she ended up being trafficked.
Very insightful information, Dr. Pear. I mean, really tells us that we need to be a lot more vigilant about what we do and how we do it, right? And I think this is one of the important things to remember, is that there's no one profile of a victim, and certainly there's no one profile of a trafficker. There's no one way to traffic. There's so many multiple dimensions to trafficking. And that's so important for us to be conscious of. We have a couple other questions and not too much time. So one, I'd like to get back to stepping away from the Venezuelan situation and the fact that the majority of victims are often extra-regional, extra-regional to the Caribbean, that is, and sort of go back to companies and the supply chain. And, what about access to training for companies, for staff? And I think this goes back to you, Lourdes, in terms of, there's a question about how do companies access training? How can they best verify their supply chains to ensure that they're engaging in ethical business? Would you like to answer that?
Yes, of course. Yes, if you want to have trainings in your company, you can send us an email. You can, Rochelle, share with all the participants our presentation, our detail of contact. So we're very pleasure to help you to have trainings and working together. As I give trainings in the hotels, it's sometimes not all the personnel can be at the same training. So we divide in different months. So, and it helps that you can have of us. We can give you the special trainings for you. And it's very important to all the person identified inside your company, this kind of possible cases. And also you give the ways inside of the security that they can report inside and give us the information and the police coordination too. It's related also with another question. It's some person knows, so be afraid of report a case of victims of human trafficking or possible cases. We have very different ways to report. You can call to the CTU, it's a special unit of trafficking in person in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But if you don't feel safety with this kind of report, also you can share the information with the Crime Stopper webpage, or the telephone of the Crime Stopper is an NGO who receive this kind of tips and send to the special unit. Also, if you don't feel afraid, if you feel afraid to, you can send the information talking with the Living Waters community, and they can send us the information to UNODC. Of if you want to talk with us directly, you can send us the information and being coordinator with us, and we send the information to the right persons in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are very open to help any person, any company in this kind of prevention of crimes. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Lourdes. And I see we have 1 minute, and so I will share the number for the counter-trafficking unit. It's a toll-free line, and that is 800-4CTU. So that's 800-4288, where reports can be made. And so to end, and as we talked about the counter-trafficking unit, it's important to remember that human trafficking is primarily a responsibility of government actors. And that responsibility is to create that appropriate enabling environment that allows for the effective combating or fighting of human trafficking. And I think Jason, Dr. Haynes did an excellent job in terms of sharing what some of those legal frameworks can look like and some of the successes that have been achieved by having appropriate legislation. And certainly we do have a lovely piece of legislation in Trinidad and Tobago that's fairly comprehensive. And so we look forward to seeing that even much more effectively implemented, because I did get a question that was unable to be answered about conviction rates. And so certainly that is something that can be improved. But if it is one thing that we would like for you to walk away with, it's that fighting human trafficking really demands that multi-sectoral collaboration to leverage really multiple sources of expertise. And this expertise can come from academia, as we've seen, it can come from civil society, it can also come from the private sector, right? Innovation, right? We really, really rely on the private sector for innovation. And I was reading a study that there are something like 305 technological tools that have been developed to fight human trafficking, right? Both from prevention, protection, prosecution, and most of them were developed by the private sector. And so we really look forward to seeing how the private sector can collaborate more in this effort and to help address the very complex and multifaceted nature of human trafficking. So moving forward, thank you so much to TIC 2020 for giving us this space to have this webinar, to host this with you. We look forward to emailing responses to you post this webinar on some of the questions that you asked that were unable to be answered. We've been talking with the UNODC as well about possibly the production of a toolkit for the private sector, and we will certainly share any other further information that we believe will be necessary or important for you in moving forward and understanding human trafficking. So thank you so much to the TIC 2020 team. Thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you all of you for listening, for your questions, and really do have a great day. Thank you.